so fast-paced. Yeah, what is the... trying to check what the total kill death count in this one is, if I can see it on this graphic. Yeah, 18 kills for JDG and 23 kills by T1 in a 30-minute, 54-second game. So, very, very high kills. The other big top lane thing that happened, I think Kanavi griefed it a little bit, but if he would have pulled this play off, he would have possibly like ended Zeus's game. There was a really big wave crashing after another skirmish had left 369 dead, and Kanavi had just hit 6, so he's thinking that if he can just dive Zeus under the turret, doesn't even really matter if he trades his life for it. He's going to deny this big wave. Renekton would have basically like this 2-level advantage on him, but he misses the ult. Zeus dodges the ult, the Viego ult, but either way, Zeus gets the kill and a shutdown bounty onto Kanavi and collects the wave. So that puts the Gangplank like at least into a serviceable state in the game. Throughout the game, like 369's Renekton still solo killed Zeus's Gangplank twice and Faker's Rise once. So he was still a really big boy on Renekton. He was still a massively important factor in this game. But I would say the overall, again, chaos that T1 can create on the map, but then they still play within this chaos in seemingly such an organized fashion. It was just way too much for JDG to keep up with. And the best example of this game was about 6 minutes in. This is where Faker got his first 2 kills. So it's a play that you basically have to make without comms. The top lane fight that I just talked about that eventually ended with Kanavi dying to Zeus is happening. Like, it's this big 2v2 fight, game-deciding level fight in the top lane. Meanwhile, because both junglers are showing top lane, the bot lanes decide to all in as well, which is pretty common for bot lanes. When you see everyone on the map, you think, all right, time to throw down, let's do it. So, like, imagine you're in comms, and there's a top 2v2 going, and a bot 2v2 going. How chaotic that is. Support's communicating with AD, top is communicating with jungle, they're both talking at the same time. Within this, Faker pushes mid, fades towards bottom lane, and Ryze ults in for this kill. Like, in isolation, Ryze pushing mid and moving bot lane for a kill is like not a massive outplay, but for some reason I just thought this was so good because of how chaotic the game was, because of how much the game hinged on what happened in the top play. For Faker to actually just like ignore it, push the wave in a turret. Yagao is obviously just catching because too much chaos is going on, and then he gets the double kill bottom lane, which also burns Hope and Missing Summer spells. It allows them to repeat gank bottom lane when Nocturne is level 6. It really speeds them up in the game. I thought that sequence of 6 minutes is what really did like win them the game in game 3. That was to me the most decisive moment. 19 minutes into this game as well, the mid control of Lucian Nami is probably bigger in this game than it even was in the previous game. Like, Hope and Missing just can't step up to the wave. And I realize now, looking at these notes, I might have misstated something that happened in game 2 when 369 throws his body in front of Lucian Nami in mid lane as Malphite. I think I confused that in my head with this game, so sorry about that. But that's what happened here at 19 minutes. Like, Gumayusi Carrier are trying to kill Aphelios with Lucian Nami, and 369 just has to step up because otherwise his AD carry is going to die. But they just dash backwards, 369 gets killed. They actually win a big fight off of this. T1 gets Baron, and this is likely the game over, right? Like, T1 is playing exceptionally well around mid lane. Faker's roaming to side lanes. 369 is a monster, but they're holding on to it. But I have to shout out one thing about JDG this game, and do a quick little side tangent on Nocturne. One of the underrated things about watching Nocturne in spectator view is you don't really understand how little these guys can see. Like, that's one of the reasons Nocturne was a big pick against Kog'Maw back in the day, is because when Kog'Maw had his W on, the Nocturne ult, like, effectively reduced his range. Because Kog with W was greater range than what you can actually attack with a Nocturne ult. But watching these fights, it almost felt like JDG wasn't nearsighted at all. Like, Yagao was still actually dashing forward into what effectively should be blind because he either had a memory of where T1 would be, or he could just kind of tell where they would be based on the conditions of the fight. I thought JDG made some of these fights incredibly close, which I think a lesser team would have just fallen over even faster versus the map pressure that T1 was putting out. But yeah, overall, the recap for this game is like it looked the closest to an elite scrim that I've ever seen during a World semifinal. The skill checks top lane, but specifically when Kanavi tried to dive Zeus's gangplank, was absolutely huge. But Faker ran the map here. Like, he was 5-0 at one point, up in CS on Azir. And I really do think if this was a more controlled game, if T1 wasn't able to push the sideways and mid-lane pressure with Lucian and Nami so aggressively, I think the Renekton might have been able to slowly take over the game. But it got too fast, and T1 was too good at playing together with too many globals. So across the board, I gave them S+ for Faker and SS for Gumayusi and Keria. Zeus gets a B. He clutched up at the end of the game, but I don't think without the performance of the rest of his team, he would have had the opportunity to do so, which is why he doesn't have a higher grade, because his late game team fighting was still awesome. Like, it was still amazing. I have to balance it out with the way the rest of those grades go. JDG, this is where their bot lane really started disappointing me, though. I gave a C to Hope, C+ to Missing, B's to Kanavi and Yagao. Might want to drop the Yagao one, actually, but the reason it's a B is because his team fighting was still so good, and he made a lot of big plays, even if Faker was completely schooling him on the map. Still a pretty big gap between S+ and B, so I think I'm okay with it. And I gave an S to 369. 3 solo kills. He tried to put the team on his back. It just wasn't enough. And I don't hold Kanavi diving Zeus and giving him a 450 gold bounty against it. So 369 did his best. Game 4. Everyone. There's not much to say about Game 4. I think JDG kind of lost their minds. They banned the Lucian. About time. If they weren't willing to first pick it away, I thought that should have been done in Game 2. But then, I don't know what this Karma Jhin was. I really don't know what this Karma Jhin was. This is not a combo, as far as I know. A lot of times you'll put Jhin with like an engage roaming support, because you just have crazy engage and it allows like a high damage, low utility rest of the map to work. Like, you pack your utility in the bottom lane so you can do damage everywhere else. But like, they throw a Sejuani top lane. Maybe they think Belvith can hard carry the game. I don't know. It looked like they're literally just kind of throwing stuff at the wall because they had no way of drafting around Keria Gumayusi. If anyone has had a lot of success with Jhin Karma, please tell me in the comments. I would love to learn. But it just didn't seem like it was going to be the thing that pulls JDG out of this. Right after this draft, I thought the series was over. Partially just because of how crazy and outplayed JDG probably felt in Game 3. Maybe even if they have a better draft, the game can be good. The Varus Renata in this draft from T1 and the way they just got kills early and then never stopped getting kills was awesome. I mean, this was... Check this out. 30 kills to 7 in 24 minutes and 54 seconds. This was just the icing on the cake for T1. Like, this game was essentially a victory lap after what was an incredibly tough series. There was a moment in the Rift Herald fight of this game where Faker swoops in on Azir, actually misses his ultimate back on Hope. So Faker is standing right next to Hope's Jhin and Missing's Karma. And he just stands there. He's just there for like 10 seconds. And at the time, I think Hope had Swifty boots, like 2 longswords and a pickaxe. It was the saddest, most pathetic looking thing. Like, Jhin had no power in this game. So yeah, I just feel like the angle was wrong. Gumayusi Keria, not only did they get first blood, they got like a 2v2 kill later. Zeus played tank versus tank. Like, hell yeah, man. He can carry on the Yone, and he can also have a badass game on Gragas. Owner, I thought, had an incredibly solid series. Maybe I'm doing him a little dirty here because I didn't feel like Like, I felt so many of the big plays this series were like Keria or Faker or Gumayushi just having insane team fights, but Owner obviously has to be there. Like, I'll put the grades in the description. I gave really good grades for everyone on T1 in this game. A+, S+, S+, S+. Keria was player of the game, and the desk agreed, and I gave pretty much all C's and D's to JDG because they look pretty tilted in this one. I would say overall for this series, T1, as I said in the start, looked better than they have all tournament. I think it gives them a lot of momentum going into the finals. I think there is a level of significance here for the LCK in general that is going to feel like, in some ways, like T1 has already been a big part of this. What happened here is, in quarterfinals, the only team to beat a Korean team was another Korean team. Now T1 is in finals, and there's 2 Korean teams playing against each other in the other semifinal. So what is going to happen is LCK teams will be the only teams to knock out LCK teams, which hasn't happened since 2017. And that was when there were 3 LCK teams at Worlds. This year, there are 4. It's a level of regional dominance they haven't experienced since 2017, and arguably, this is even more so. So this is the year of the LCK. And there's a small bit I want to do on this where, and sorry if I'm a broken record saying this for people to watch all the time, but in the olden days, Korea was very much about, like, why are you taking this fight? You have to be fighting over something. Every fight was for a purpose, and that purpose was going to be an objective, and they played with so much discipline. They would punish you if you were out of place, but, like, the mindset of so much of the region was like, maximize your CS, maximize your gold, your team comp is going to make sense, you're going to win team fights. Then, I think, like, the mechanics and the giant server population of LPL and the, like, actually no, getting 300 gold is the objective, that's why I'm trying to fight, kind of overpowered the LCK a little bit. That was like Rookie and the Shy for IG being the 2 most dominant solo laners in a meta that was defined by solo lane dominance. They won the World Championship in 2018. But then, like, this new era of T1, and I think this transfers to some of the players on the other LCK teams, like Zeka, this incredibly young, highly mechanical mid laner for DRX. It's so fast. They are playing faster than the LPL teams are playing. And in T1's case, the reason it's so cool and dangerous is they still have that connection to the past with Faker. So he's still able to make these great macro reads, but the team is also willing to play so quickly, which makes them, like, devastatingly good. And it makes me really excited for the finals. So I'm sure I'll think of something else. I'll be doing another episode here tomorrow for Genji vs DRX, so if I think of something huge, or if I miss something, let me know in the comments. I'll mention it in the next episode right off the top. And yeah, T1 3-1. Faker's going back to finals again. Let's see if he can win his 5th title. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Hello, and welcome back to another JLXP. T1 versus RNG. One of the most anticipated matchups, I think. I mean, the most anticipated matchup of the World Championship so far, because there was so much history between the teams. 3-time World Champion Faker up against 3-time MSI Champion Xiaohu. RNG, never winning Worlds. I think another parallel between these teams, so dominant in spring, very good summer regular seasons, fell off a little bit in playoffs. RNG, LPL 4th seed, T1, LPL or LCK 2nd seed, but almost 3rd seed. They barely scraped it to the finals before getting 3-0'd by Genji. But my personal read was that neither of these teams necessarily excelled on the Zeri, Sivir, Yumi, Lulu patches, and that's what all of playoffs was played on. So I felt like their seed was a little bit under their skill. Personally, RNG was my dark horse to win the World Championship, so seeing them go down 3-0 is definitely very disappointing. And I'm going to do the same thing I did yesterday with the Rogue versus JDG series, where I go over each of the drafts individually. I talk about how lanes would be expected to go based off of all the data I could gather from the Games of Legends matchup tool, and then also talk about the big beats and where I think these games broke open. But I'll kind of start with the conclusion, go into the body of the article, and then actually wrap it up at the end with some final thoughts. This was, I think, a really good display of T1 skill. I think it was disappointing that we didn't get more games, because I think in most situations RNG wins that game too, if not for a little bit of a choke job by Xiaohu in game 2 and some very clutch plays by Gumayushi. And then game 3, I think, was the accumulated tilt of going down 2-0 and the massive amounts of pressure that RNG was playing with, and then T1 just really rounding into style. So before I get into the actual breakdown, I just wanted to go over some history that the broadcast did in the pre-show, but for those that missed it, I thought these were the most important takeaways. The history of the matchup in terms of Worlds Games won. T1, 142 Worlds victories. RNG, 124 Worlds victories in terms of games won. Number 1 and 2 all time. Not even close. Number 3, 4, and 5 is actually Fnatic, G2, and C9 at 77, 72, and 56. T1 also has 4 of the 5 youngest players still playing at the World Championship. Zeus is 18, Zeus is 18, Owner is 19, Carry is only 20, Gumayushi's only 20, and Faker is 26, which would still make them the youngest overall team, despite having Faker as a 26-year-old. Faker has always been first in his group, and when he has gone to Worlds, has always made it to at least semifinals, winning in 2013, 2015, 2016, losing in finals in 2017, losing in semifinals in 2019, losing in semifinals last year in 2021. So, just insane world stats for T1. But also, Faker is the only one carrying over that legacy. Bengi, too, was the coach, because he was actually playing with Faker in 2013, the first time they beat RNG in the World Final. But all of the new players are extremely young, which you always have to question how these young players are going to stand up to immense pressure, like when you're playing against RNG, the team that beat you in Game 5 of MSI half a year ago. A couple more stats they talked about going into the game. Zeus led groups in terms of top laners in damage per minute, damage percentage, gold per minute, forward percentage, CS difference, and gold to 15. He was absolutely the most dominant top laner statistically in the group stage. Part of that is he played a lot of carries. If you compare him to a player like 369, who's played a little bit more utility, that's going to change those numbers a little bit, but still incredibly impressive statistics. And then in terms of play style for the teams, I would say, even though both teams have a fairly supportive mid laner, the stats that I looked at least throughout Worlds, the mid-jungle proximity for RNG, so the amount of time that Xiaohu and Wei spend within 1,500 units of each other, which is like kind of about a third of the way down mid lane to Raptors, would be about the distance you're looking at there, was higher than any other Korean or Chinese team in the group stage. And then T1 had a slightly higher bot lane jungle proximity, so that's the amount of time that Owner would be around Gumayushi. So other than that, like, carry top laner for Zeus, Breathe a little bit more flexible. Faker has played a much more supportive style. Xiaohu, also a godlike roamer, I think prefers melee champions, especially because of his history as a top laner. Gala and Gumayushi are just so incredibly good mechanically as AD carries. And the story, at least for T1, was that Guma and Keria were really dominant in spring, but not that dominant in summer. And if T1 would win, it would generally be through Zeus popping off. That obviously changed this series, but we'll get into that. And I think that's enough table setting for this series, as I have the Game 1 scoreboard up here. But I did think that every draft this series was actually very interesting. I would say this Game 1 draft would probably be like 70-30 in favor of T1. I thought this was a really good draft, but part of it was because they were able to debut the Ash Heimer. The way this draft worked, Graves was first picked by T1, which is exactly what we saw JDG do yesterday. It's very effective, especially if you can pair it with the majority of your lanes having prio, because you can invade with Graves for the majority of the game. And basically, I feel like RNG thought they could blind Pekka because that's been a very dominant pick for him. It's also one of Guma's best champions. But then when T1 immediately answered with Ash Heimer, I don't think there's a pick there that actually works for RNG in terms of getting prio, so they picked Nautilus. And I think if they were to do this draft again, they would change. So if you look on the screen, or if you're on the podcast version, I'll just say what the 4-5 bans. T1 then banned Talia and Galio, which to me are the two champions that would have a chance to bail out that bottom lane, because they could push mid and move bot with a lot of play. So T1 banned those away right away. I think if RNG was to do this draft again, they would have picked Galio or Talia right before they'd be able to get banned, because once that happened, then Xiaohu blind picked the Akali because they thought maybe he'd be able to assassinate the Ash Heimer late game, but it also allowed Faker to match with Victor, so they couldn't get any push mid, they couldn't get any push bot. Then they get all the way to the 5th pick on red side as T1 has blind picked Camille, and they have the famed, dreaded R5 Renekton. I actually don't hate it in this situation because they need a winning lane, and Renekton can definitely beat Camille and is favored in that matchup, especially if they're able to pull off some ganks, and then maybe he'll be able to kind of do some flanking, give them some late game side lane prio if he gets a big enough lead. So that's the logic behind that pick. I think they just really needed the winning lane. I think the one other choice they could have gone for would be Gangplank, just because T1 had Victor, Heimerdinger, Ashe, and if you put the GP ult down near them late game, it's going to zone them away from fights and make it very difficult for them to follow up on any Camille engage. But that's definitely hindsighty and definitely might feel a little too squishy for what they were going for. So, yeah, I think it's a one draft, but like the win conditions there for RNG are very narrow. They really need Renekton to get far ahead. And for T1, as dominant as the draft is, if they fall behind in this game, game one, they're extremely vulnerable because they have all squishies, 4 ranged champions, and Camille is their only front line. So if they can't push waves and be first to set up on objectives, it would be so easy for Akali, Viego, Renekton, Nautilus engages to just destroy their whole team. So the game looked very good for T1, but was actually somewhat of like a, you really need to trust your ability to not make mistakes for this draft to work. So getting into the actual game, as we're going back a little bit, they did the same thing that JDG did with Graves yesterday, where they just have such a good level 1 invade with Graves. So as the blue side team, they do a late invade into the enemy red buff. But this is so good in this case because they also have Ashe, Heimerdinger, in bot lane, so it's impossible for Wei to cross into the enemy red. So you're pretty much just starving the Viego unless RNG is ready for that invade with like 4 or 5 people, but they're also not going to want to do that because they need to be in lane since they don't have prio. It's just a really, really good like Graves gap that they can just start this game off and really make the game difficult for Wei's Viego. At 3 minutes, Wei tried like just a gank mid because he had no camps to farm. It doesn't work. Xiaohu missed his Eon Faker, which probably wouldn't have killed, but at least would have chunked him. And by 4:30, like, the Raptors are already getting sunk by Omen. So it's just a gap. They're so sad very early on in the game. But I will say, throughout this game one, RNG did fight on the few narrow windows they would have to have a chance to win the game. It just didn't work out. So the Herald play that RNG did at 9 minutes and 10 seconds is a really good timing. They had no timing to crash Renekton top waves before 9 minutes because Graves always had river control and was always invading, so they could never actually get like a good Renekton dive. But Renekton hits like level 6, level 7, gets a good trade onto Zeus's Camille, and boom, they go straight for Herald. They don't even have enough bot lane prio to actually have a numbers advantage, but they still do it because the Renekton Viego Akali is so good at skirmishing 3v3. The one thing that doesn't work for them here is they don't get the Herald. So it goes over to Graves, and that is huge because after the one fight where Waze Viego does get a lot of kills, he will recall, go back and start Dragon. Nobody covers Breathe top lane on Renekton. Owner and Zeus are there. They kill him. They drop Herald. Zeus gets way too much gold. So after that happens, the bounty goes, like, the turret basically goes all the way to Camille. The kill goes to Camille. And then if you fast forward a few more minutes in the game, there was another big moment where Zeus gets the bounty from Waze Viego because Owner is just patrolling the river with Umbral Glaive Graves and there's no way they can see. Like, all of those plays combined, I think by like 14 minutes, the game is close to unwinnable. Because, like I said, the only thing that can work for RNG is if Breathe gets far enough ahead that he can push Camille in side lanes. But when Zeus gets that massive injection of gold, RNG have no way to get numbers advantage fights reliably. So T1 is up 6 plates to 0. They get 960 gold. The CS in this game that I tracked in the previous series, I'll go over it really quickly now. At 15 minutes, in the 43 games that Camille has played against Renekton, Camille averages being down 13.7 CS. In this game, she's actually down 9, so it went generally like okay for Renekton, but the whole turret went to Camille, so he's super accelerated. As we've seen of really coordinated Graves teams, they're able to go above the average CS in their matchups. So 61 games Graves played against Viego, it averages 10 up for Graves. This game was up, if I'm doing the math correctly, 27. Akali versus Victor actually goes to Victor by about 4.7 CS in the 75 matchups. In this game, Xiaohu was up by 27. He actually laned very well against Faker because Faker didn't move that much. It was pretty much just an amazing early game lane from Xiaohu. He was just unable to make a big advantage of it later. And then Aphelios versus Ashe. This was a really hard one to kind of assess accurately because the Heimerdinger versus Nautilus takes so much of the matchup. So like the average is Ashe being down by 3.4, but like you can kind of throw that out. I expect Ashe to be up by a lot of CS in this lane. And Ashe was actually down 8 CS for 15 minutes, 142 to 134. So based off of the averages, even though the bottom one's a little skewed, RNG would be 15 CS over expectation. So in terms of laning phase, like their hands were working pretty well, but the big beats of the game were going in T1's favor. Mostly in the fact, the one thing that T1 needed to win this game was Zeus to somehow get ahead of Renekton, and they had it. So they're in an incredibly, incredibly good spot at 15 minutes. And you can kind of fast forward through the rest of this game because it's basically check, does RNG ever have 5 people in the same place? The answer is no. Because T1 can push any side lane they want. They have Hawkshot, they have Umbral Glaive, they have so much vision control, and they can always fight on their terms. They can always be first to objectives, they can always clear vision, and it just doesn't give RNG realistic angles to fight the game. By the 31-minute mark, there was 8 straight minutes of T1 just pushing, warding, getting a Drake, taking small advantages, and RNG never had a real window to fight. This is when T1 got 4 items on Camille and immediately started Baron. They needed a way to close this game because the dragon stacking was too slow. They get it because Camille just ults Waze Viego. That's the only way they could steal because RNG, like their tempo is so bad. They actually don't even have a window to fight. They only would have a window to steal. As soon as T1 gets this Baron, my expectation is they're just going to brute force their way into mid lane. The majority of teams do what's called a 4-1 when they get Baron. So they'll throw their best split pusher top lane with teleport up and have 4 people and kind of passively move towards the mid. So that gives one very small window for RNG to fight where they can at least try to do a 5v4 fight while the second wave is getting pushed in. And they do. Ming lands like this amazing hook onto Gumayushi, but like it's just not enough. They lose the fight and the game is over. So game 1 to 2-1, right? I think 70-30 draft. RNG shouldn't be that disheartened about this. Let's go game 2. Let me scroll. So here's the game 2 team comp. This is the game where you can see the 0-8 Jace. But I'll talk about how we got here in the draft first. So, blue side bans Graves and Caitlyn, which is a little interesting that Wei is not willing to play Graves when, like, I feel like RNG has the laning skill to get several lanes of prio, but I guess they're just not as comfortable as T1 in playing these like 4 or 5 ranged, low engaged team comps, because they do take like a specific amount of practice and comfort to play them. You need to be very confident in your laning phase. You can't really make many mistakes. Usually you can fall behind and have a realistic chance of winning with the draft that T1 has in game 2. So first pick is flex pick Sejuani. It just signals that they want to do front to back. You know they're going to do Sejuani. It's a flex pick top lane, but generally they're just going to go with double melee. They get Silas Fiora. They give the counter pick opportunity, so to speak, to Zeus. He picks Jace. Everyone calls him the best Jace in the world. He's been so good on it. It is technically a winning pick. And then I think the other really crucial point in this draft was actually the 4-5, where Keria just blind picks the Renata. And if you look at the other bans, Heimerdinger was banned, Lucian was banned, Aphelios was banned, Tristana was banned on the 4-5. So a really heavy pinch to Gala's champion pool. And pretty much, like the way T1 has been trying to get these drafts, in my opinion, is they just want to make sure they have push in the majority of their lanes. They're not expecting Faker to win lane, so they're generally just, let's get a winning top and bot side. Faker's not going to die. We can play the side lane for full game, and then we're going to out-team fight you. They're going to accrue a gold lead because they're young kids, just have such good hands. Faker's going to be there. He's going to play team fights amazingly. He's going to shot call amazingly, and they're going to win. Didn't necessarily go to plan in this one, but the draft, like, did work. Xayah and Renata had amazing prio the entire game, but absolute disaster happened at 2 minutes and 42 seconds. They went over this on broadcast, but I'm going to cover it again. The jungle ships passing in the night as both junglers start bot lane to path top lane because they know they need to impact top lane. Owner goes through river for a blue buff invade, but Wei Sejuani was actually done from the blue side, red Raptors Braum, and actually just dodges the Viego vision. So Zeus has no chance. There is no way he expects the Sejuani to be behind. They get the gank, they burn his flash, and that should have been the game-changing moment. Sejuani gets enough gold that he gets cooldown boots at 5 minutes. So wherever he goes, he's the fastest, he has an experience advantage, and he has 3 other melee champions to just chain CC people. So anywhere Wei goes, he wins. At 5 minutes, he crushes Owner and River. He gets the Akali and the Viego flash. Then, at 6:20, Owner's just trying to do something. They actually have a window where they could kill Breathe, but if you remember this, Zeus misses his EQ. Sejuani, because she's so damn fast, arrives, gets another double kill. The game is like basically over, man. And you can even see like the first Herald fight, T1 moved first because they had prio bottom lane, but they're playing a low to no engage comp and they're not ahead. So as soon as RNG is just like there, T1 can't turn. So they just have to leave. And they end up trading the Rift Herald for the Infernal Drake. And most of this game was pretty much just Breathe killing Zeus. They just hard camped that top lane. They got the Akali really far ahead. But then they didn't quite have the killer instinct, right? So there was a window between like 13 and 20 minutes where Wei had a few like close call ganks where he couldn't quite finish the kill and they don't blow the gold lead open enough. So it's still a big lead. By 25 minutes, like RNG I have written down here, has a 6,000 gold lead at 26 minutes. But the one thing throughout all of this is Gumayushi is getting every CS. He was This reminds me I need to do the 15-minute check-in. He had 164 CS at 15 minutes to 137. He was up 27 CS against him. The Fiora was up 13 over Jace. The Sejuani and Viego were very close. And Silas was actually up 7 CS against Akali when normally he's down by 8.4. So RNG, overall, when I summed everything up, was 30.